Hi, everyone. Today we're going to continue our discussion on, the Lincoln Douglas topic, and we're going to start our discussion on thinking about the ways that, COVID-19 actually, sort of demands that we, ask, why, or I guess how racial capitalism obviously functions as not only just purely a thing that exists and is about race. It's obviously about capitalism, right? But we have to think about the way that racial capitalism sort of organizes space, right? And if we think about how racial capitalism organizes space in general, then we're sort of already kind of getting at the way that racial capitalism is a spatial thing, right? It's a spatial process, but it's also the way that racial capitalism functions as a spatial process also affects the environment, right? And so thinking about how those two things sort of correlate with each other is super important. And it's obviously, important because the way that those things sort of, produce difference, right, is how capitalism sort of operates, and that's how it sort of takes form, right? Especially when we're thinking about, COVID-19, or, thinking about the pandemic, right? It's sort of just, it's sort of, highlighting, it's sort of, basically shedding light on the sort of biopolitical, technologies that, that are created, or the biopolitical, space that is made possible, by how certain logics within, the nation state, within US, within globally, not just the US, but thinking about how everyone's response to the virus sort of exposes how everyone is sort of engaged in different capital struggles, and so thinking about COVID-19 and thinking about how it produced massive job loss, and thinking about how that accumulated on top of an already ongoing race war, right? Because there's intense amounts of racial brutality that's happening. I think that those are the things that sort of highlight how racial capitalism exists within COVID-19. It's like we've got racial violence, right? We've got environmentalism that obviously reproduces violence, right? And so thinking about how racial capitalism is specifically applied to Black people is sort of going to be the focus for this video. And so obviously, we were thinking about already, like in the US, obviously Black people were already dying at an extreme higher rate than white people, right? It was already sort of a known fact, right? But this was obviously based upon things like racial difference, what located in the state, right? And so thinking about how the state reproduces some forms of violence, but also how those things travel to the community, is sort of thinking about how the exacerbation of certain state policies sort of trickles down to exacerbate pre-existing medical conditions and things like that. So we think about how environmental racism and unequal access to healthcare and medicine in general, right, is a is a prerequisite to understanding why it is, or how or whether infrastructure or technology or any logistical mechanism will ever actually be enough to help Black people. Why is that? That's because generations of exposure to all of these things are already being accumulated on top of the current exposure to violence, right? And so that's why if we're thinking about, well, okay, why is it that the resolution itself would be ultimately maybe a bad idea, is because, well, constant centuries of state terror has left Black people with literally just conditions that automatically mean that they are more vulnerable to death because of COVID-19, right? So thinking about how public health has been a biopolitical tool that has existed for many, many centuries, right? And that is something that we're going to sort of get in, the sort of next video. We're going to be thinking about how, disease itself, has literally been isolated in order to create certain conditions of, suffering, and then linking those, to sort of understand how COVID-19 acts as a sort of spatial arrangement for, race, and, also thinking about how that made certain bodies, basically unable to have any type of, healthcare whatsoever. And so it kind of gets at how, like, even the access or the right to even own a certain type of intellectual property, on the right to health or the right to, life itself is a biopolitical tool that the nation state uses in order to govern, certain bodies. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about how public health has basically been a thing that has, separated like racialized bodies from, non-racialized bodies. And so thinking about how those categories, are impacted, amongst each other, and then thinking about whether or not, the resolution itself will, gets at the heart of that question, will sort of be the crux of the next video. Thank you.